Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Um, you ready to dive in?
I am. Let's go.
Awesome. Let's start with, obviously I know who you are, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your job is?
Absolutely. My name is Liz Crooks. I'm the director at the Pentacrest Museums. That includes the Old Capitol Museum, which is primarily a history museum, and the University of Iowa Museum of Natural History, which is a natural history museum. And we have a lot of things that we have to conserve, everything from ethnographic objects to animal specimens to pieces of art. So we conserve it all.
That's great. That leads into my next question about the mural, the can't talk, cyclorama that you guys are working on at the Natural History Museum right now. So it's over 100 years old, correct?
That's correct. It was installed. What was installed during the period between 1914 and 1911. The entire scene was created and installed. So it opened to the public in 1914, and it's been in place ever since then. The scene itself is of Laysan Island, which is 800 miles northwest of Hawaii. It's part of the Hawaiian archipelago. Laysan is a small island. It's only about 3.5 square miles, and it is an estuary for a number of seafaring birds, namely the Laysan albatross. Also, the black-footed albatross uses it as a nesting ground too. It came to the attention of museum director Charles Nutting in 1902 when he was part of an expedition studying. He was studying ocean invertebrates, which was his area of specialty. He was not interested in birds or Pacific wildlife at all. But when they came across this island and they anchored off of it, he was taken by the sight of millions of birds that were making their home on this tiny little island, and they filled the sky. And he was so enamored, he dreamt of it when he returned to Iowa. The building that we're in, McBride Hall, was under construction at the time. At that time, it was called the Natural Science Building. It was under construction. Part of it was reserved for the museums, and he changed the plans and reserved a space specifically for the cyclorama. He knew he was going to make it. He, at that point, wasn't sure how. So he set about, first thing he had to do was raise the money because, similar to today, there was no funding for it. He couldn't get any funds from the legislature. The institution wouldn't fund it. So he set about raising the money. It took him quite a while to do that. And also along the way, he had to hire professor of taxidermy, who was also a naturalist, Homer Dill. Homer Dill, in 1911, they would go back. Dill would take an expedition back. It was Dill, two students, and a painter, Charles Corwin, who was on loan from the Field Museum. In exchange for specimens, the Field Museum lent them their panorama, their exhibits painter, and he was very well known at the time for the work that he did with museums. So he went along. When they got there, so this was 7 years later after Nutting had been there, when they got there, they found a situation of ecological disaster. In the interceding years, there were three things that had happened. Rabbits had been introduced to the island by a fertilizer company. They were there mining guano or bird manure as fertilizer. There were Japanese poachers that had arrived, and then the spike in the millinery fashion of the day was to use bird feathers for ornamentation. And so the poachers were there killing the birds for the feathers. So the biggest piece of that was the rabbits, because they ate all of the vegetation. That meant the insects that lived in the vegetation were gone. The birds that fed on the insects were dying out. The vegetation also held in place the very delicate sandy soil. And so when those roots were gone, it was very difficult for the ground dwelling birds to create and maintain their nesting areas. So it was very different, almost barren. The seabirds fared better than the smaller perching birds, because the seabirds just left. They went to another island. The perching birds didn't fare so well, and 3 of those species that were there originally are now extinct. So though they eliminated the rabbits, it took them 10 years and 3 trips, because they kept running out of ammunition. But they eliminated the rabbits, and the island is making a recovery. Now its biggest threat are plastics and man-made materials. So that's a whole different story. That's for your ecological conservation class. So the mural, the cyclorama depicts the island as it was when nutting went. It depicts the island in its heyday, in its peak condition. The mural is 128 feet long, and it wraps, I think it's 270 degrees. There's a small opening where we enter the cyclorama, and it's 12 feet high. It's painted on muslin. It's an oil painting, and it's not mounted directly to the wall. It's really kind of interesting the way that it's attached. It's lashed to the bottom, the plaster portion of the foreground. It's lashed to that with, we think it's a cotton cord. We're not really sure, because you can't easily get to it. And then there's a piece of trim board that the canvas is stretched across, and that's mounted to the wall. So there is a small space in between, but it's not enough to be able to access anything. But there is a little bit of airflow, not a ton. Part of it is also on, trying to think about it, of the 4 sides, 3 of them are exterior walls. So with the changes in relative humidity, that's been a challenge for the painting. It's done in oil. Uh, it's interesting because the room has no heating or ventilation, so there's no temperature control. There's no control over the relative humidity. It's just well, you've been to it, so there's the the
I like as soon as you brought it up over our emails, I was like, I have seen that thing dozens of times since I've been alive.
exactly
I never saw
exactly. So it's really that exterior. It's a box, so you're in the viewing box, and that is inside just a room. It's just a rectangular room. There's no, other than the windows that have been boarded off,
hmm
there's no other airflow in there. What air conditioning or heating it does get, it takes from the adjacent gallery, bird hall, but that also does not have its own air handling system. It's dependent on the auditorium, which is next door, and the flow of air via an exhaust fan in the attic. So it's really not ideal.
hmm
But given all of that, the mural is in wonderful condition. It's
Oh,
kind of amazing. There is some crazing, there is some staining. The painting was, well, it was installed in, we'll say, 1914. We'll use that as our start date. At that point, the building was heated and lit with natural gas. So there is a fine layer of soot on everything. The birds in the foreground, the plants, the vegetative matter, everything has this fine coating of soot. Uh, and it looks like maybe in years past there were some attempts to clean the painting.
Mm-hmm.
There's some streaking, and I'm not sure if that streaking, some of the streaking we know was from, there were water pipes that ran behind it. We know that there were some problems with those water pipes. They've since been disabled. So there's some staining on a portion of it because of that. But there's also some streaking, faint streaking, and we don't know if that's condensation, if that's detergent that was left behind from a previous attempt to clean it, and that detergent has attracted, the oils in the detergent has attracted more dirt. It's hard to say. But there's not been any loss of paint. Well, I take that back. There are some very small areas of paint loss on the sides where the painting joins the infrastructure of the viewing room. It's tin. They're, that's painted on metal. And
Mm-hmm.
so that metal has lost some paint, but very, very small pieces, smaller probably than a quarter, and only in a handful of areas, which is amazing to me. Although you can tell the paint on the metal is in, it's a lot looser, and
Yeah.
there's a lot more crazing and a lot more, it's going to need some significant stabilization.
Mm-hmm.
So, but
Hold up for
really,
100 years with no temperature control. That's very impressive
it's,
quality.
and the specimens themselves too, the birds are actually in very good shape. Part of it is due to that coating, that fine layer of soot. It's served as a protective layer. It's protected them from all of it, from UV damage, from the lighting.
Mm-hmm.
Probably made,
That's very
to a
impressive.
certain extent, a little microclimate for it. So it
Awesome.
there are some people who are advocating that we should do nothing
Mm-hmm.
because it's lasted this long and is in such good condition, and that by interjecting an HVAC system and cleaning things, we're going to have unintended consequences. They may be right. I don't know.
The risk.
We'll see. Uh,
There's always a
yeah,
certain amount of professional discretion
right, right. But we have to do something, right? We can't. We would be negligent if we did nothing. So
Well,
that's
I'm
and
sure
we
this project is speaking to people about that line between preserving pieces of
yes,
history and the marks of time, as well as, but also committing to its restoration and making sure that we maintain it for future generations.
that's right.
Hmm.
That's right. You think of all of the generations who have enjoyed it since 1914, and it's incredible.
A lot of
Um,
them.
yeah, yeah. Well, I grew up in Iowa City too, and came to see it when I was a kid.
Hmm.
So it's come full circle for me, I guess, which is crazy to think about. Um, so I guess that kind of gets to the significance of what it holds for visitors. It's been an integral part of our community, and it's the crown jewel of the museums. It's really our showpiece, and it's barely been touched. There have been very few efforts. Like I said, the one attempt to clean it, um, and they've switched out some of the materials. There's a small pond in it, and they switched out the materials in that. Um, so people know it's here. We started a fundraising effort in August. It will be 2 years ago. The Center for Advancement published a piece about the cyclorama and the work that we're doing to conserve it. And there was a huge outpouring from people all around the country, and letters that I remember that I
Oh.
used to study in there when I was in college, or I used to take my kids there, or my mom was a student and she would drop me off there while she had class in the auditorium. So everybody has a story about it, and it's really heartwarming. And I know how much I care about it, but to see that kind of outpouring was really rewarding, to know that it meant so much to the larger community. So that was wonderful.
That's
It
the
was
cool
really good
thing.
to see.
Support
Yeah,
from all over the country. I
yeah.
didn't even think about the fact that it would be known and remembered by people outside of Iowa who had gone come there to study or moved away. It's incredible that that
We
still has an impact on them.
yeah, we have through that magazine article, we someone who lives in Hawaii was in Iowa visiting relatives. They saw the magazine, they saw the story, they went back to Hawaii, and there was in the city of Hilo, there's a Hawaiian bird convention,
Hmm.
something. I'm not sure what it was, but it happens every 2 years. And she was at it this past September, and she happened to mention to the people, there's a group, the Friends of Midway. They are a fundraising organization to support Midway Island. Midway Island is the next closest island. And so she pulled up the electronic version of the story on her phone and showed it, and some of the people there had been to Liaison. And through that, we made a connection with the Friends of the Hawaiian Archipelago, and we had a Zoom call. And one of the wildlife biologists said, we showed them the 360-degree view of it, and she said, I know exactly where those rocks are. I know exactly where that pond is. I know where these things are. So that was really mind blowing. Um,
For 100 years, wow.
yeah, yeah. So now my next mission is to get myself on a research trip to Midway, or to Midway, because then I can. It's a 4-day sail from
Oh,
Midway to Liaison, but
amazing.
I'm going there. So um, let's see. Let me get back to your questions. I went completely off track.
Oh, no, not at all. We can talk about whatever. No, I was gonna say it's actually it's amazing. It's kind of a full circle moment that this mural was created to try and preserve the image of the island in its natural habitat, and now we're working to both bring the island back to its glory on the mural.
And the mural, yes, and yes, we talk about that a lot. The irony, and there are so many parallelisms.
Hmm.
It's incredible. So it was really wonderful to connect with that group in Hawaii, because we've been trying to explain to people the real island is in danger again and again because of man's interaction with it, and not with rabbits this time, but with plastics and other materials. So to be able to connect with them and have the real-time connection, I think, is going to help us a lot with our program. One of your questions was um, about engaging the public with the conservation,
Yeah. Yes.
and that's a tie-in. As we do that, we'll have right now the plan is to have some time-lapse cameras and to share some scenes and um, do. We're not sure how long it's going to take, so we're not sure of the timing of the posts and the different kinds of processes we'll use. We do know that there is a considerable amount of lead and arsenic and probably also asbestos in the entire cyclorama itself. Arsenic was used as a preservative. Um, Certainly, there's lead in a
Yeah.
number of components. Probably in the plaster that creates the foreground. There may even be some in the painting. Uh, we didn't find any mercury, so that's good.
That's good.
But the whole space will be sealed off and under hazmat precautions while people are working in there, and people will have full PPE on when they're working in the space. We had an assessment done last February, and that's those assessors went in with full PPE, from booties to respirators and goggles. So There are some pictures of them on our website if you want to take a look at them.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
and I can send you the conservators report for the mural if that would be
That would
helpful.
be amazing. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Um,
Be doing a little blog post to go along with this. So
yeah. So we'll we'll do updates. We'll talk about all of these different challenges, you know, the hazardous materials, why they were used, why we don't use them now. We'll talk about the challenges, some of the things that I've already identified. The mural can't come down,
yeah,
so it has to be conserved in place, and uh, that raises another challenge because there's stuff in the foreground.
hmm
And how are we going to get to the mural? There's also that very delicate plaster that has birds, the hollows for the birds' nests in it, because some of the birds are nesting. So you can't walk across the surface of it. Portions of it you can. That's not accurate. Portions of it you can walk across, but there are large portions of it you can't. There are large portions that are filled with specimens and vegetative material. One of the other, and in addition to the birds that are in there, the plant matter, if it's not the original woody material from the island, the leaves that were used are made of wax. So they made molds on the island and they brought the molds back, and they cast 50,000 leaves to make the plants. And they're all wax with a thin piece of muslin in between. So there's two layers of wax with muslin in between. And that wax has become very brittle.
I bet that
I
sounds incredible, but so difficult to work with.
so I don't know. I don't know how we're going to clean those. Well, the royal we. I don't know how those are going to be cleaned. I'm not sure. We can't. You have to be very, very careful.
hmm
You can't touch them or brush up against them. So we've got to figure out how to build scaffolding that will allow the conservator to clean the mural and move around the room,
Yeah,
and also allow some sort of platform for the object conservator to work on the specimens, because they can't be removed. They're the wires that hold them in place are fixed on the underside with globs of plaster, so those they can't come out. It's really ingenious, but and
it
I'm
is.
sure.
It seems like it was designed to make it as difficult to take
I
apart
know,
as
I
possible.
know, and I often think about so Homer Dill, the naturalist and professor who installed it. I often think about him and what would he say, knowing that here we are 115 years later trying to conserve his works, and would he think we're crazy? Could he imagine that it would even be here this long? Paintings, you think, yeah, they're going to be around forever, but do you think your taxidermy is going to be around forever? Um, it's amazing. So
Well,
there are a lot of those are all kind of,
very proud,
yeah. It's
that the effort has continued to
it's
preserve this.
beautiful. His work is absolutely beautiful, and so we oftentimes talk about the intersection here of art and science and education, and that's what we do. That's what the Museum of Natural History is all about. So we're really proud of that. And he was really a groundbreaker in that field. So I could talk about Homer Dill for a very long time. He's a fascinating person. Um, so the challenge are access. How are we going to get to it?
hmm
I don't know. We have
So pretty much from what you said, it sounds like pretty much no part of the diorama is removable in front
no.
of it. None of it. Wow.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. So it's all conserved in place, which makes me a little nervous. Um, so it's not a really big project. but it's a very complicated project. So next month, we meet with an architect to start a feasibility study. That, I think that's another question. The experts, yes. Oh, the process of the project. The first steps were recognizing that it needed conservation. Then we brought in some conservationists to do an assessment, and that was this past February. They issued a report for us um, with their recommendations about what should happen. And then we've been raising money. I've been writing grants, and we're at a point now where we're doing the feasibility study. That will happen. We'll start that next month. We'll bring in an architect and a structural engineer. I'm not sure what other kinds. Maybe we'll have an HVAC engineer to take a look at what it's going to entail to access the space and where ductwork could go, needs to go. It will be a standalone system, so it will have to be housed somewhere,
Yeah.
somewhere in the attic. I don't know where. So those are the steps, and that's where we're at right now. I'm waiting to hear back. I've written a application for a Save America's Treasure grant that would help fund it. We'll have a better idea of the cost when we get the feasibility study completed, but we're estimating it right now to be around $1 million to do it all. It depends on how much it's going to cost for the conservation. I think the construction and the installation of the HVAC is fairly straightforward and easy to estimate. The unknown is the scaffolding and the conservation. And I don't know. I don't know. That's
It would be a very time-consuming project.
yes. And the other piece of it is we have to take it all apart. The glass has to come out because that's the only way we can access it. The access to the space, that's another challenge, is the access. The access to the space right now is through a little tiny hatch in the ceiling. You go up you get a ladder, you go up a ladder. There's a platform. If you look at the 360 video that was taken, you can click on some of the hot spots and you can see the top of the platform. So you climb up to the top of the platform. There's a ladder, another ladder built specifically for the cyclorama. It was built in 1914. It is not OSHA approved. You take that ladder and you put it down. There's one place where you can put it down and into the cyclorama, and you climb down into the cyclorama. So that's how we access it right now, which is not feasible. So we'll have to also build in some other sort of entry point so that we can, as you say, the long-term preservation and conservation, so that we don't have to wait another 100 years to undertake this again, or wait another 110 years to well, we have monitors in the space. We can't actually examine
Yeah.
anything. That's not practical. So those are some of the plans for the future, is to build in an access point so that we can more easily do that. Yeah, the interesting discovery was this very specific ladder that was constructed just for this purpose. We didn't know. We called someone who had worked here in the 80s. He had been in when they replaced some of the materials in the pond. He was part of that team, and so we called him and said, "How did you get in there? What did you do? What's the secret?" And he told us where to look
There's a
for the
hidden
ladder, and because the ladder is hidden behind a piece of the structure of the cyclorama. So we had no idea that there was a ladder, the secret ladder. Uh, which was crazy to us. Um, so the experts that we've involved so far are the objects conservationist, the and I'll send you their names. Well, their names are with the report, but the paintings specialist and the object specialist um, will have an architect, a structural engineer, probably HVAC, and then a contractor who's going to do the actual construction work that's involved. They'll probably have to have quite a bit of experience in historic preservation
Yeah.
or historic houses because we have no idea what we're going to find when we start opening things up. That's a big part of the unknown, and another piece that makes it difficult to estimate the cost. Let's see. Surprises. Oh, how do we balance the integrity?
Mm-hmm.
And we talked a little bit about that.
We did, yeah.
And there are people who say don't touch it, and they have a point. That's They have a valid opinion, and who knows? We could be opening up Pandora's box.
Or you could open it up and find out the thing would have crumpled tomorrow if you hadn't
Right.
touched
I
it.
imagine the little downy chicks. Well, they're not little; they're huge chicks.
Yeah.
The downy albatross chicks that are in there. I imagine them being like a dandelion that's gone to seed, and when we touch them, they're just going to go. The objects conservator assures me that he was pleasantly surprised at what good shape they're in, and so I don't need to have that worry, but I still do. It's incredible to me. So the restoration of the painting is fairly straightforward. It is in pretty good shape. It doesn't need a lot. It needs a thorough cleaning. It needs some stabilization. And that's about it for the painting.
Yeah, we just
The
have to figure out how
specimens,
to reach the painting.
yeah, we just have to figure out how to reach it, how to do those things. Um, and part of it is the fact that nobody's been able to get to it. And so nobody's tried to do in these interceding years, nobody's done a botched restoration. Nobody has tromped around in there and broken it down. So that's a big part of why it is in such good shape, is because nobody could really get to it easily. So that probably has played to our benefit.
Yeah.
Uh, and the piece for us, the balance that we're wanting to strike, we're going to redo the lighting because the lighting was redone in that 80s renovation, and they put some shields on at that point they were fluorescent lights. We've converted to LED now. They put some shades on them, I think, in an effort to direct the light in more of a downward, so it wasn't shining up and lighting
The
this huge
ceiling.
space above them that didn't need to be lit. But it's had the effect of, it's like you've put a baseball cap on it. You have, or that it's a cloudy day on the island and the top half of the mural is in the shade.
Yeah.
So there's a very distinct line. And so we're going to have, that's another person we're going to have come in as a lighting designer and redo the lighting. Originally, it was lit from the ceiling. There, you can see there's a space where there were incandescent bulbs that were used to light it. I don't know how they changed them. You have no idea. That would be interesting. But
There's another secret ladder somewhere.
yeah, right. There's something. I don't know. I have so many questions for Homer Dill, but so that's something that we're going to do, is to redo the lighting and to make it more natural and to make it look like you're on a Pacific island. My hope is that when it's cleaned, I think it's going to look like a whole new whole new painting. I think we're going to be on a Pacific island on a bright sunny day, and I'm really excited to see that. The piece that's giving us some worry is the objects,
Mm-hmm.
and there we have to find the balance between that historic preservation and the restoration.
Yeah.
I think in my mind, the worst thing that we could do is to spend $1 million or more on this project, to have it shut down for a year or however long, to have the entire exhibit offline for however long it takes, at least a year, I think, uh, and to reopen it and have people say, well, did you even do anything? You know, when the birds were installed, they were painted. There were parts of them that were painted. You know, the
Yeah.
blue-footed boobies, their feet are painted blue and they're faded. There are some birds, the frigates, or they call them, I think another name for them is man of war. They have the males have the big red
Yeah.
um, chin pouch. Those are painted and they're faded. Uh, some of the birds, they need on birds, well, on all taxidermy, the space around the eye rim is usually pretty fragile and fades or flakes easily. And so there's some restoration work that needs to be done there. The conservationist who did our assessment really holds a pretty tight line that you just conserve, you don't restore.
Mm-hmm.
And for this project, I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
I don't, I don't, because, uh, again, I go back to these things were painted when they were put in.
Mm-hmm.
Those birds are not exactly like they came off the island.
Yeah.
They've been manipulated already. And so I don't think, additional manipulation is going to be a bad thing. I don't think we do anything permanent. You know,
Yeah.
that's the standard. Anything you do has to be reversible. But there are ways to do that. There are ways to do some infilling, and I don't have a problem with that. And I think we owe it to the public, if we're
Mm-hmm.
going to do this, to really make it like it did when it opened in 1914. So I don't know. I really would like him to do the conservation, but I don't know. He's coming in April to do some things with the herring, and while he's here, we're going to have a talk with him about how intensive he's willing to get with the specimens. So we'll see. Maybe we can convince him.
Good luck. Fingers
Um,
crossed.
yeah, but that's
Hopefully
the
we'll get their blue feedback.
yeah that's for us the biggest challenge. I think they'll a lot of things will with a taxidermied mount. It's amazing what happens when you even just clean their eyes and you get all the grime and dust off of their eyes. That's transformative. And so if we get this layer of dust and soot off of them, I think that's also going to be amazing. But, you know, they're seabirds and they're very oily. And no matter how carefully they were prepared, there's always going to be a residual oil there. And that attracts
Sure.
that kind of
Yeah.
dust and soot. And so it'll be interesting to see. Um, I mean, he did some test spots, and the swab was absolutely filthy. It was just stomach turning. Oh, gross. But can you
Well,
imagine if you
I'm
hadn't?
excited to follow
Yeah,
along with the rest of the project because,
yeah.
yeah,
If you hadn't dusted anything for 100 years, ick. Yeah.
no,
So
yeah,
it's kind of incredible to see what good shape it's in. But so those are, I think.
yeah.
Let
I
me
think
see.
we covered everything that I
Yeah,
had on my list.
yeah.
Was there anything else that you wanted to share about the project, your work?
Well, it's an incredible honor and privilege to be able to undertake this, and um, 10-year-old Liz never would have thought
Oh,
she was going to do this. So that's kind of cool on a personal level. Um, our our director of our research collection, so the person who takes care of all of our specimens, she also grew up in Iowa City and also grew up coming here. And so for us, it's really this very special project. And I was hesitant to start it because I didn't want to mess it up. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. Like, don't mess it up.
well, I think it sounds like an amazing project, and I think if anyone can do it properly, it's someone who really, really loves the piece, loves the museum, and just
Yeah.
came up with it. So,
Yeah. I think we're going to get together a good team, and um, it's going to be really exciting.